Right, so here's the thing about hiding 9 million quid from your own daughter. It sounds absolutely mental until you meet her husband. Then suddenly, it seems like the most sensible thing you've done since buying a lottery ticket with your birthday numbers. Which, let's be honest, is still completely barmy. But at least it's your particular brand of barmy. Picture this. A cozy January evening in 2024, snow falling like nature's own dandruff, and me standing in my living room watching my daughter Chloe wave about a wedding invitation like it's some sort of religious artifact. The heating's on the blink again, because of course it is, and there's that special kind of tension in the air that only comes when your child is about to make a spectacular cock-up of their life whilst you watch helplessly from the sidelines. "Dad, I'm marrying Eric whether you like it or not," she announced, with all the dramatic flair of someone who's clearly been practicing this speech in the mirror. Her voice cracked on the word "not," which rather undermined the whole defiant daughter routine, but full marks for effort. "Now, Eric. Where do I begin with Eric?" Picture the sort of bloke who calls his own ideas disruptive and genuinely believes that networking is a personality trait. The type who orders wine by pointing at the second most expensive bottle and saying, "Something in this range, but with more character." At our last family dinner, he called my 30 years of engineering quaint. Quaint. Like I'd been doing needlepoint instead of designing bridges that don't fall down when people walk on them. "Chloe," I said, trying for that perfect tone of paternal concern that doesn't sound like you're about to lock someone in a tower. He's arrogant, self-centered, and treats people like they're there for his personal entertainment. Remember that text he sent you last month? The one where he called your ideas cute? She hurled the invitation onto the coffee table with theatrical precision, where it promptly knocked over a framed photo of the three of us. Me, Chloe, and her mum, from back when life was merely complicated rather than completely mental. The glass cracked with that lovely sound that basically translates to, "Your family is fucked. You're just jealous because I'm finally happy," she shrieked, deploying the classic emotional nuclear option. "Mum's been gone for 15 years, Dad. You raised me alone, but I need my own life now. Eric loves me. He proposed on that trip to the lakes, remember? Stay out of it." Right, I thought, watching her storm about like a tiny tornado of wedding-induced hysteria. Because nothing says eternal love like a bloke who can't be arsed to remember your coffee order, but somehow managed to organize a proposal scenic enough for Instagram. The thing is, my old man, Chloe's grandfather, had spent years teaching her how to spot users and manipulators during their fishing trips and chess games. Users always reveal themselves eventually, "Sweetheart," he'd say, moving his bishop with the precision of someone who'd spent decades outmaneuvering arseholes in business. They can't help themselves. It's like a compulsion. And there it was, the elephant in the room that I couldn't bloody well mention. Granddad had died just 2 months earlier, leaving me the sort of inheritance that makes people do very stupid things. £9 million, to be precise. The kind of money that transforms ordinary dickheads into full-blown sociopaths overnight. I'd planned to tell Chloe eventually, but something about this rushed engagement felt like watching someone walk towards a bear trap whilst humming show tunes. Call it paternal instinct or call it 46 years of watching people reveal their true colors when money's involved. "Chloe, please?" I tried again, stepping closer and immediately regretting it when I saw her face go full Chernobyl. "Think about it. You've only known him a year. Why the sudden rush?" Her face twisted into that expression that means you're about to get both barrels of carefully stored resentment. "Because I love him, and if you can't support me, then don't come to the wedding." And with that absolutely devastating parting shot, the kind that makes you want to applaud even as your heart disintegrates, she grabbed her coat and stormed off into the Iowa winter like the dramatic heroine of her own tragic romance novel. The door slammed with the sort of finality that makes you question every parenting decision you've ever made, leaving me alone with the cracked photo and the sudden realization that I was about to become the villain in someone else's love story. Brilliant, I thought, sinking into my armchair and staring at the scattered glass. Absolutely fucking brilliant. The inheritance papers sat in my desk drawer like a loaded gun I wasn't sure I'd ever need to fire. Thank Christ I hadn't mentioned them yet. Something told me that conversation would go about as well as this one had. Hours passed. The house grew colder, both literally and metaphorically, and I found myself doing that thing where you replay an argument in your head whilst coming up with all the brilliant things you should have said. You know the drill. Suddenly you're Oscar Wilde reborn, armed with devastating wit and perfect timing. Except it's 3 hours too late and you're talking to an empty room. The phone felt like it weighed about 17 stone when I finally picked it up to dial Chloe's number. 2 rings. Then her voice, tentative and small. "Dad, it's late." "I know," I said, staring at the wall where our family photos hung like evidence of happier, less complicated times. I couldn't sleep. What I wanted to say, "Chloe, that man is a predator in an expensive suit, and you're about to become his next victim whilst his mother applauds from the sidelines." What I actually said, "Chloe, I'm sorry I overreacted. If Eric makes you happy, then I'll be there for the wedding." The pause on the other end could have powered a small village. Then, like sunshine breaking through nuclear winter. "Really? Oh, Dad, thank you. I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, everything's moving so fast. But it feels right. You'll see." We chatted for a bit, her excitement bubbling through the phone as she described the venue. Some charming hall in downtown Sioux City with views of the river. And I made all the appropriate noises whilst internally preparing for what felt like watching a car crash in slow motion. After hanging up, I trudged to my study, where the floorboards creaked like a commentary on my moral flexibility. The desk drawer opened with a whisper of conspiracy, revealing that envelope from the lawyer. Estate of Harold Sanders, $9 million. I locked it in my safe and shoved it to the back of the closet, burying the secret like some sort of financial time capsule. Because nothing says healthy family dynamics like hiding life-changing amounts of money from your only child whilst they waltz towards matrimonial disaster. God, I'm brilliant at this parenting lark. February brought those lovely mild days when you can almost pretend winter won't last forever, which was more than I could say for my optimism about this bloody wedding. I'd taken to visiting Granddad's grave, partly for comfort and partly because talking to a headstone felt marginally less futile than most of my recent conversations. "You'd know what to do, Dad," I muttered, kneeling by the stone marked Harold Sanders, 1943 to 2023. The wind rustled through bare trees like nature's own laugh track. He built that fortune quietly, investing in local properties whilst teaching me the value of keeping your mouth shut. "Protect her," he'd said on his deathbed, gripping my hand with surprising strength. And here I was, protecting her by lying through my teeth and enabling what looked like the emotional equivalent of a pyramid scheme. The wedding preparations became a masterclass in swallowing one's pride whilst maintaining a rictus grin. Take the bridal shop fitting, where I watched Chloe twirl in her gown like she was auditioning for a fairy tale, the lace catching the fluorescent lights in a way that managed to be both beautiful and slightly desperate. "You look beautiful," I told her, and meant it, even as I wondered if I was watching someone dress up for their own funeral. "Thanks, Dad. Eric's mum is helping with the flowers. Caitlin has such exquisite taste." Yes, Caitlin. Eric's mother had the sort of exquisite taste that involved looking at our modest home like it was a particularly disappointing museum exhibit. The woman could convey more disapproval in a raised eyebrow than most people manage with a full-blown tantrum. Then came the planning lunch at some trendy bistro where the portions are tiny and the attitude is supersized. Eric and Caitlin rolled up in their BMW because of course they did, parked outside our sensible sedans like a statement about social mobility. Eric shook my hand with the grip of someone who's read exactly one article about power dynamics, his eyes already scanning the menu with the sort of boredom that suggested this establishment wasn't quite up to his usual standards. "Philip, good to see you're on board," he said, managing to make support for my daughter's wedding sound like a minor business concession. "This wedding is going to be absolutely top tier." Caitlin, resplendent in her designer armor, leaned in with the smile of someone who's just spotted a spider in their salad. "Yes, we're sparing no expense. Chloe deserves only the finest." Translation: Your daughter deserves better than what you lot can provide, but fortunately we're here to elevate this whole tragic situation. The conversation flowed like treacle mixed with arsenic. Over artisanal sandwiches that cost more than my weekly shop, I found myself in the surreal position of nodding along whilst 2 people discussed my daughter's future like they were planning a hostile takeover. That's when I heard it, Caitlin's stage whisper to Eric. Make sure the prenup covers everything, darling, just in case. He nodded, smirking like someone who just pulled off a particularly clever magic trick. My fork paused halfway to my mouth as the penny dropped with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Oh, you absolute fucking vultures. Chloe chatted away about honeymoon plans, blissfully unaware that she'd apparently wandered into the middle of a financial strategy session disguised as wedding planning. I sat there, chewing my overpriced sandwich and wondering if there was a special circle of hell reserved for people who prey on romantic young women with father figures who have mysterious inheritances. Later, driving home through streets that suddenly felt like a minefield, I stopped by my old mate Jim's office, a lawyer who operates out of a strip mall and charges reasonable fees for keeping his mouth shut. Inheritance privacy, I said casually, accepting a pamphlet that looked like it had been printed sometime during the Thatcher administration. How airtight are we talking? Completely watertight if you don't disclose, Jim assured me, leaning back in a chair that had seen better decades. But why the secrecy, mate? Just being cautious, I replied, pocketing the information like some sort of suburban spy. Right? Cautious. Because hiding 9 million quid from gold diggers whilst your daughter plans to marry into their family is definitely the sort of thing they teach you in parenting classes. March arrived with all the optimism of a tax bill, and suddenly we were at the bloody wedding, that charming hall in downtown Sioux City, which turned out to be exactly as advertised. Assuming you enjoy venues that try too hard and charge accordingly. I stood there adjusting my tie, which felt like a noose someone had thoughtfully pre-knotted, watching guests mingle under chandeliers that probably cost more than my car. The whole affair had that particular atmosphere you get when people are spending money they want everyone to know they have. Caitlin held court near the entrance, resplendent in an outfit that screamed, I have opinions about your life choices and a platform to share them. She caught my eye across the room with the sort of look usually reserved for something unpleasant stuck to one's shoe. The ceremony itself was efficient. That's the word. Chloe floated down the aisle on my arm like someone in a lovely dream, whispering, Thanks for being here, Dad. Whilst I smiled and nodded like some sort of paternal bobblehead, Eric's vows sounded like he'd downloaded them from a website called Generic Wedding Promises for the Modern Groom. Steady, almost rehearsed, with all the emotional authenticity of a customer service script. When they kissed, I clapped along with everyone else, though my applause felt like it was coming from somewhere very far away. The reception was where things got properly surreal. Tables groaned under platters of what the venue probably called Midwestern comfort food reimagined. Essentially normal food at premium prices. I navigated the crowd like someone walking through a minefield made of small talk and passive aggression. Caitlin intercepted me near the bar, champagne flute in hand, smile sharp enough to cut glass. Philip, how lovely that you're here alone. No +1 from your circles. There we go. 20 seconds into conversation and we're already into subtle class warfare. Family's enough for me, Caitlin. Congratulations on the day. She leaned in with the confidential air of someone about to share insider trading tips. Eric's worked terribly hard for this moment. Chloe's quite fortunate he'll be able to elevate her beyond, well, what she's known. Her eyes performed a little tour of my off-the-rack suit, the visual equivalent of a food critic describing a disappointing meal. Eric materialized beside us like a genie summoned by smugness, clapping my shoulder with the sort of hearty gesture that's meant to establish dominance whilst looking friendly. Philip, fantastic turnout. Your toast later. Keep it short, yeah? We've got quite the schedule. Translation. Speak when spoken to, and make it snappy. I moved away, found my designated seat, and proceeded to listen to wedding guests discussing my daughter's marriage like it was a particularly interesting stock tip. She's certainly marrying up, isn't she? That's for sure. Her father's sweet enough, but that little house of theirs, right? Because nothing says appropriate wedding conversation like economic analysis of the bride's family. Toast time arrived with all the inevitability of a root canal. I stood, glass raised, heart doing things that definitely weren't covered by the NHS. To Chloe and Eric, may your life together be filled with the love and respect Chloe deserves. She's my world, and I trust you'll cherish her accordingly." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Eric was already reaching for his microphone with the eager anticipation of someone who's been waiting all day to hold forth. "Cheers, Phil. Appreciate the sentiment. And hey, with my property deals closing soon, we'll have plenty to cherish. Houses, holidays, the works. No more scraping by." The laughter that followed felt distinctly pointed, like a collective "oh, burn," from people who thought financial struggle was a character flaw rather than a circumstance. Caitlin chimed in from her throne. "Indeed, progress is everything, isn't it?" Chloe shot me an apologetic look but didn't intervene, and I sat down with fists clenched under the table, making silent vows about vigilance and justice and possibly researching the legality of citizens' arrests for aggravated dickheadery. The evening continued its relentless march towards disaster. We cut the cake, a towering monument to conspicuous consumption that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. I danced with Chloe, her head on my shoulder, whilst she murmured reassurances about ignoring her new family's casual cruelty. "Dad, just ignore them. They're excited about the future." "Excited about what, exactly?" I asked, spinning her gently whilst trying not to let my growing dread show. "Our future. It's going to be brilliant. Brilliant, right? Like the Titanic was brilliant right up until it met that iceberg." The evening's piece de resistance came during the garter toss, when Eric flung the thing with theatrical flair whilst one of his colleagues shouted, "Bet that's not the only inheritance he's after." Eric laughed it off, but his eyes met mine for a split second with the sort of sharp calculation that made my blood run cold. Did the bastard suspect something about Granddad's estate? Thank Christ I'd hidden it. Suddenly, my paranoia felt less like mental illness and more like strategic thinking. A week later, my phone rang with the sort of shrill persistence that usually means someone's life is falling apart in real time. It was late March, and I'd been spending my days in a strange limbo of worry, receiving increasingly terse text updates from Chloe about settling in and adjusting to married life. The sort of messages that say absolutely nothing while somehow managing to scream volumes. "Dad, please come get me. I can't stay here. It's all wrong." The words hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. Here was my daughter, my brilliant, stubborn, magnificently naive daughter, sobbing down the phone less than a week after promising to love, honor, and presumably tolerate her new husband until death did them part. "What happened? Where's Eric? Just come. I'm outside with my things. Please hurry." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone whilst my brain tried to process the sound of someone's fairy tale exploding in real time. I grabbed my keys and coat, half-dressed and running on pure paternal adrenaline, and tore out of the house like someone fleeing a natural disaster. Because that's exactly what this was, wasn't it? A natural disaster. The sort you see coming but can't bloody well stop. The drive through Sioux City's eerily quiet streets felt like traveling through some post-apocalyptic landscape where all the hope had been surgically removed. Rain started pattering on the windshield because of course it did, nature's own pathetic fallacy made manifest. I found her on the porch of their expensive suburban palace, looking like a war refugee with her 2 suitcases and that particular brand of devastation that comes from having your entire worldview collapse in the space of a week. The house loomed behind her, dark and empty, like something from a particularly depressing estate agent's nightmare. "Chloe, get in the car," I said, jumping out into the rain. "Let's get your bags." She threw her arms around me with the desperate intensity of someone clinging to the last life raft on a sinking ship. "Dad, thank God. They're not even home. Out with his mother. Probably celebrating whatever scheme they've been cooking up." I loaded her suitcases into the boot, each thud echoing my growing fury, and we drove away from Eric's suburban fortress in the sort of silence that's heavy with unsaid things. "Tell me what happened," I said once we were safely away from the scene of the crime. "Did he hurt you?" She drew a shaky breath, staring out at the rain-soaked streets like someone trying to piece together the fragments of their own life. "Not physically, but, Dad, I found papers. Divorce papers. Hidden in his drawer, along with messages to another woman. He's been planning this whole thing. Of course he bloody has. Because nothing says eternal love like having your exit strategy filed and notarized before the honeymoon. Divorce already? And cheating? Tears streamed down her face with the relentless efficiency of someone who'd clearly been storing them up. Worse than that, Dad. I heard him on the phone with Caitlin talking about securing assets. He kept asking about your finances, about whether Granddad left anything. When I said you had nothing significant, he went cold. Like I'd suddenly become surplus to requirements. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as puzzle pieces began clicking into place with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He mentioned Granddad specifically? Yes. He kept probing, asking if there was some secret inheritance you were hiding. I told him you barely had enough to get by, and that's when everything changed. Dad, I ignored all your warnings, and I'm so bloody sorry. Right? So the golden boy wasn't just a garden variety arsehole. He was a calculating, predatory arsehole who'd married my daughter as part of some elaborate financial fishing expedition. We pulled into my driveway, and I helped her out of the car like she was made of spun glass. Inside, with tea brewing and the central heating cranked up to tropical rainforest, she finally told me the whole sordid story. It started right after the wedding, or rather, right after the honeymoon that never happened because Eric was suddenly too busy with work. Then came the discovery. Walking in early from her job to find him with some colleague from his office, carrying on like they were auditioning for a particularly tasteless romantic comedy. He didn't even look sorry when he saw me, she said, dabbing at her eyes with tissues that were rapidly becoming inadequate for the task. Just annoyed, like I'd interrupted something trivial. Then he shoved those divorce papers at me and told me to sign them quickly. No fuss, because nothing says mature relationship like treating marriage dissolution like a routine business transaction. But here's the thing that really gets me, she continued, anger starting to burn through the devastation. I grabbed his phone first and found months of texts, to her, to Caitlin, all of them plotting about assets and how to secure the family fortune. He was convinced you were hiding something, Dad. Some massive inheritance that would make all this worth his while. And there it was. The truth laid out like evidence in a particularly depressing court case. Eric hadn't married my daughter. He'd married what he thought was my bank account. When that turned out to be a disappointment, she'd suddenly become an inconvenient obstacle rather than a beloved wife. The manipulative, calculating, parasitic little shit. She slipped off her wedding ring and dropped it into a cup holder with a sound like the last nail in a coffin. I feel so stupid, Dad. I rushed into all this for what? Independence? Love? It was all just performance art. No, sweetheart, I thought, watching the rain streak down our windows like nature's own tears. You fell victim to a professional. There's a difference between being stupid and being targeted by someone who's made a career out of exploiting decent people. But I kept that to myself, because sometimes being a parent means knowing when to shut up and just be present while someone's world burns down around them. That's when we heard the car pulling up outside. Engine revving like testosterone made audible, gravel spraying under tires in a display of what passed for masculine authority amongst the emotionally stunted. Speak of the devil. And here I was hoping we'd get at least one night's peace before the next act in this tragic farce. Eric jumped out of his car like some sort of suburban action hero, all righteous indignation and expensive cologne, storming up to my front door as if he owned the place. Which, given his recent behavior, he probably thought he did. I stepped out into the night air, positioning myself between him and the house like some sort of middle-aged bouncer, arms crossed in what I hoped was a convincing display of paternal authority. Eric, turn around and leave. She's not going anywhere with you. He strode forward with all the swagger of someone who's never had his perfectly veneered teeth rearranged by a furious father-in-law. Where is she? Chloe. Get out here. This isn't over. His voice echoed off the neighboring houses like some sort of suburban mating call, prompting several porch lights to flicker on as the neighbors prepared to witness what promised to be either a domestic dispute or dinner theater. Possibly both. She's inside, safe from arseholes like you, I said, managing to keep my voice steady despite every instinct screaming at me to introduce his face to my fist. You betrayed her, cheated on her, and now you're done. Get off my property before I call the police. He laughed. Actually laughed. With the sort of bitter amusement that suggested he found my threats about as intimidating as a strongly worded letter from the parish council. Safe from what? Her own choices? She signed up for this marriage, old man. And you, hiding whatever pathetic savings you've got tucked away, Caitlin knows people. We'll drag this out in court. Take what's rightfully ours. Rightfully ours, right? Because obviously marrying someone gives you automatic ownership of their family's assets. I must have missed that particular wedding vow. Threats won't work, I said, stepping forward into what people who've never been in a proper fight would call his personal space. Leave or I'll make that call. Chloe wants nothing from you except her freedom. From the window, I caught a glimpse of Chloe peeking out through the curtains, her face pale in the lamplight. Eric followed my gaze and immediately shifted into what I can only describe as manipulative bastard mode. Voice going all soft and reasonable, like butter wouldn't melt. Chloe, darling, come on. We can work this through. Your father's filling your head with paranoid nonsense. She didn't move, didn't respond, didn't fall for the performance. Good girl. That's when his mask slipped completely, revealing the calculating predator underneath. Fine. But I know more than you think about that old man's money. Caitlin's already looking into it. You'll regret this. There it was. The admission that this had always been about money, wrapped up in the sort of veiled threat that makes you understand why some people choose violence as a conflict resolution strategy. He spun on his heel, quite dramatically actually, like someone who'd been practicing intimidating exits in the mirror, and roared off into the night, leaving me standing in my front garden having what could charitably be called an epiphany. They knew about the inheritance, or suspected it, anyway, which meant this whole bloody marriage had been a treasure hunt disguised as a romance, with my daughter cast as the unwitting key to a fortune she didn't even know existed. Well shit. I locked the door behind me and found Chloe in the kitchen, looking like someone who'd just watched their entire worldview get fed through a shredder. He's gone, I said, settling into the chair opposite her. Tomorrow we'll sort out those divorce papers and get you a proper lawyer. Someone who specializes in dealing with manipulative arseholes and their equally manipulative mothers. She nodded, but her eyes were troubled. Dad, what if he really does know about some inheritance? Should I be worried? Should you be worried? Sweetheart, if you only knew. But I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not whilst she was already dealing with the emotional fallout from discovering that her marriage had been a financial strategy disguised as a love story. Don't worry about Eric's threats, I said instead. We'll handle whatever comes next. Famous last words, those, right up there with what's the worst that could happen? And, I'm sure it'll be fine. The next morning dawned with all the promise of a tax audit, and Chloe and I found ourselves sitting across from Jim in his strip mall office, surrounded by the accumulated legal detritus of 3 decades of small-town disputes. The coffee was instant, the biscuits were stale, and the advice was about to get very expensive very quickly. Grounds for divorce. Infidelity with text messages as evidence, Jim said, flipping through our hastily assembled documentation whilst tapping his pen in a rhythm that suggested he was already calculating billable hours. We can file for dissolution today. Aim for uncontested, but prepare for them to fight dirty. Chloe leaned forward with the sort of determination that makes you proud and terrified in equal measure. He cheated, lied about everything, and now he's making threats. I want out clean and simple. No alimony games, no dragging it through the courts for months. Oh, my sweet, naive child. You still think this is going to be simple. That's when my phone decided to perform its little buzzing dance of doom across Jim's desk. Eric's name flashing like a warning sign at a nuclear facility. Jim gestured for me to answer it, mouthing speaker phone, with the sort of glee that lawyers get when they smell billable drama. What do you want, Eric? His voice crackled through the speaker with all the charm of fingernails on a blackboard. You think you're being clever? Filing already? Caitlin's got contacts everywhere, old man. We heard about the lawyer visit. Listen carefully. Drop this nonsense, sign the papers I gave her, or I'll bury you both in court. We know you're hiding assets, debts, maybe secret accounts. We'll expose everything. Debts, right? Because obviously the logical explanation for someone wanting to protect their daughter is that they're hiding massive financial problems. The mind of a predator, ladies and gentlemen. Always projecting their own moral bankruptcy onto everyone else. Chloe's eyes flashed with the sort of anger that makes you want to applaud. Expose what? Your affair? Go ahead, Eric. I'm done with your threats. He laughed. That particular brand of bitter amusement that sounds like confidence but smells like desperation. Big words. But when a judge sees how unstable you are, running out like that will claim abandonment. And those assets your family's hiding? Will take the house, the car, whatever scraps you people have managed to accumulate. Jim was taking notes with the focused intensity of someone who's just realized their mortgage payments are sorted for the next 6 months. He caught my eye and mouthed, "Keep him talking." Because nothing helps a legal case like having the opposition incriminate themselves on tape. Threats won't change the facts, I said, managing to keep my voice steady despite imagining various creative ways to introduce Eric's head to a brick wall. Stay away from us. I hung up, and the sudden silence felt like the calm before a very expensive storm. Well, Jim said, looking remarkably cheerful for someone who just listened to what amounted to extortion. That helps our case enormously. Harassment, threats, implied blackmail. I'll note everything. Now about payment. Yes, payment. Because nothing says family crisis like having to liquidate assets to afford basic legal protection. That's when I made my first strategic decision regarding Granddad's inheritance. A modest wire transfer from a carefully established secondary account, just enough to retain Jim plus a private investigator he recommended. Nothing traceable to the main fortune, nothing that would raise questions, just a concerned father spending his savings to protect his daughter. From a certain point of view, it wasn't even lying. More like creative accounting with a side order of justifiable paranoia. The investigator, a former police detective named Reyes who looked like he'd seen every possible variation of human awfulness and found them all equally tedious, met us at a coffee shop that served the sort of bitter brew that makes you question your life choices. Financial trails, evidence of the affair, any skeletons in their closet, he said, sliding a contract across the table with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this dance before. Give me 2 weeks, and I'll have enough dirt on them to build a small mountain. 2 weeks to dismantle Eric and Caitlin's carefully constructed facade of respectability. Money well spent, even if it was money Chloe didn't know I had. I signed the contract, authorized another wire transfer, and prepared for what was shaping up to be the most expensive education in human nature I'd ever purchased. Still cheaper than letting them get their claws into 9 million quid, though. 2 weeks later, Reyes and I sat on a park bench like a couple of suburban spies. Except instead of trading state secrets, we were exchanging evidence of garden-variety fraud and matrimonial chicanery. He handed me a manila envelope with the sort of ceremonial gravity usually reserved for handing over nuclear launch codes. Photos, timestamps, bank records, he said, lighting a cigarette with the casual air of someone who'd given up caring about lung cancer sometime around his 3rd divorce case. Your son-in-law and his charming mother have been busy little bees. I opened the envelope and found myself looking at the sort of evidence that makes you lose faith in humanity while simultaneously feeling vindicated in your paranoia. Photos of Eric in dimly lit offices, shaking hands with a notary who looked like he advertised his services on the back of bus stops. Bank records showing payments that could charitably be called irregular and more accurately described as bribery. But the real kicker was a photo that made my blood run cold. Eric examining a file clearly labeled Sanders Estate Inquiry. The calculating little shit had been actively investigating Granddad's will. They've been probing public records, Reyes continued, flicking ash into a nearby rubbish bin with the sort of practiced aim that spoke of years spent in stakeouts and divorce cases. Looking for any trace of your father's estate. They're thorough, I'll give them that. Thoroughly corrupt, but thorough. So there we had it. Confirmation that Eric's entire courtship had been less romantic comedy and more financial thriller with a side order of fraud. This is gold, I murmured, flipping through photos of what looked like a criminal conspiracy disguised as wedding planning. How deep does it go? Deep enough to bury them, Reyes said with the sort of professional satisfaction that comes from catching arseholes in the act. Forged signatures, bribed officials, the full Monty. But play it carefully. Don't tip them off until you're ready to drop the hammer, right? Because nothing says measured response, like sitting on evidence of criminal activity whilst your daughter's marriage implodes in real time. I took the evidence to Elena Vasquez, the sort of lawyer who charges by the hour and earns every penny by being absolutely terrifying in a courtroom. Her office had the kind of understated elegance that whispered, "I will destroy your opponents and bill you appropriately for the privilege." "This is comprehensive," she said, spreading the photos across her mahogany desk like someone laying out a winning poker hand. "Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, we can not only get the divorce, we can probably get them arrested. But it'll cost. Cost, right? The sort of conversation that usually ends with people selling kidneys or remortgaging their houses. Except I had 9 million quid sitting in a bank account that Eric and Caitlin were desperately trying to find. I authorized another wire transfer, this time substantial enough to make Elena's eyes light up with the sort of professional glee that suggested Eric was about to have a very bad day indeed. Strategic use of hidden assets for defensive purposes. Granddad would have approved. Meanwhile, Eric and Caitlin had launched their own campaign. A sustained assault on Chloe's reputation that made medieval siege warfare look subtle by comparison. It started with whispered conversations at bridge clubs and escalated to what can only be described as a coordinated character assassination via social media. Mrs. Ellis from next door knocked on our door one evening, bearing a casserole dish and the sort of awkward expression that meant she was about to deliver bad news wrapped in neighborly concern. "Philip, dear," she said, clutching her offering like a shield. "I heard some rather unpleasant gossip at the bridge club. Caitlin's been telling anyone who'll listen that Chloe left Eric over nothing. That she's unstable, possibly even having an affair herself." Of course she was. Because nothing says classy divorce proceedings like starting a whisper campaign that would make a tabloid journalist blush. Chloe appeared at my shoulder, her face going through several interesting color changes as the implications sank in. "That's a complete lie. She's trying to make me look like the villain in my own bloody marriage breakdown." Mrs. Ellis nodded sympathetically, the sort of expression that said she'd seen this particular drama play out before. "I don't believe a word of it, dear, but it's spreading. Even saw it on that neighborhood Facebook group, you know how people talk, right? Because apparently we were now living in a Jane Austen novel, except with social media and considerably less wit. The campaign was working, too. Chloe came home from work looking like she'd been through a particularly brutal job interview, reporting that colleagues were asking if she was all right based on things they'd heard from friends of Caitlin's extensive social network. The beauty of small-town character assassination. Everyone knows everyone, which means one well-connected gossip can poison an entire community's opinion faster than a bad seafood buffet. That's when I decided to fight fire with a considerably more expensive and effective brand of fire. I'd been hiding the inheritance for months, watching it sit in various accounts like some sort of financial doomsday device waiting to be deployed. But now, with Eric and Caitlin actively trying to destroy my daughter's life whilst hunting for money they had no right to, discretion began to look less like wisdom and more like cowardice. Time for the nuclear option. I called Elena and authorized what can only be described as a shock and awe legal campaign. Private investigators, forensic accountants, character witnesses, expert testimony on psychological manipulation, the full arsenal of modern litigation warfare. "Are you sure about this level of commitment?" Elena asked, though her tone suggested she was already mentally planning her next holiday with the fees I was about to generate. "I'm sure," I said, thinking about Granddad's deathbed advice about protecting family. "Spare no expense. I want them destroyed so thoroughly that their own mothers won't return their calls." Well, in Caitlin's case, she was her own mother, but the principle stood. The beauty of having serious money whilst your opponents think you're skint is that you can outflank them in ways they never see coming. Whilst Eric was hiring cut-rate lawyers and expecting to steamroll a grieving widower and his unstable daughter, I was assembling a legal team that could have prosecuted war crimes. It felt a bit like bringing a nuclear submarine to a knife fight. Excessive, perhaps, but definitely effective. The investigation uncovered layers of fraud that were almost artistic in their complexity. Forged documents, bribed officials, falsified financial records. Eric and Caitlin had been running what amounted to a matrimonial Ponzi scheme, targeting women from families they suspected of having hidden assets. Because apparently my daughter wasn't their first victim, just their most recent one. The really beautiful part was watching them dig their own graves deeper with every threat they made. Anonymous texts, threatening voicemails, attempts to intimidate witnesses, all meticulously documented by our legal team whilst Eric thought he was getting away with psychological warfare. Some people never learn that when you're in a hole, the first rule is to stop digging. Court day arrived with all the drama of a particularly expensive theatrical production. The courthouse in downtown Sioux City looked appropriately imposing under gathering storm clouds, like something from a legal thriller where the good guys actually win for once. Eric sat across the aisle with Caitlin beside him, both looking like they dressed for a job interview with Satan himself. Their lawyer, a discount Harvey Specter knockoff, kept shuffling papers with the sort of nervous energy that suggested he'd suddenly realized he was outgunned. The proceedings began with Eric's side calling that dodgy notary to the stand. Klein, a nervous little man who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on earth. Eric's lawyer approached with all the confidence of someone who'd clearly never met a real legal professional. Mr. Klein, describe the property transfer document you notarized for Mr. Harland. Klein fidgeted with his tie like it was trying to strangle him. It was a standard property transfer. Mr. Harland and his wife both signed it, granting him rights to family assets. I verified their identities and made it official, right? Except for the tiny detail that Chloe had never seen the document before, let alone signed it. Elena rose for cross-examination with the sort of predatory grace that made sharks look cuddly. Mr. Klein, this document is dated before the wedding. Yet public records show you weren't licensed to practice as a notary at that time. Care to explain that discrepancy? Klein began sweating with the enthusiasm of someone who just realized they were about to be fed to the legal equivalent of a wood chipper. Must be some sort of administrative error. I distinctly remember the signing. Elena slid a photograph across the stand like someone dealing cards in a poker game where the stakes were measured in prison sentences. This is you, accepting cash from Mrs. Harland 3 days before allegedly notarizing a document you weren't legally qualified to authenticate. Would you call that payment a bribe, Mr. Klein? The sound of a fraud case collapsing is quite distinctive, sort of like a controlled demolition, but with more whimpering. Klein's testimony crumbled faster than a biscuit in a typhoon. Then came Caitlin, taking the stand with all the dignity of someone who'd convinced herself that moral superiority was a valid legal defense. Chloe was clearly unstable from the beginning, she declared, as if mental health diagnoses were something she was qualified to dispense. She abandoned my son without cause, spread malicious rumors about our family. The property transfer was simply a precautionary measure. Precautionary measure, right? Like fraud is just another form of financial planning. Elena's cross-examination was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Precautionary against what exactly? Your son's documented infidelity? The affair we have photographs and text messages proving. She presented evidence with the sort of methodical precision that makes opposition lawyers reconsider their career choices. Bank records showing payments to Klein, photographs of Eric with his mistress, recorded conversations discussing how to secure the inheritance through marriage. That last bit was particularly devastating. Nothing quite like having your criminal conspiracy played back to you in open court. The real fireworks came when Elena presented the recorded confession from Klein, obtained completely legally by our investigative team, admitting to forging Chloe's signature in exchange for payment from Caitlin. Eric's lawyer objected with the sort of desperate energy that suggested he was already updating his CV. Your Honor, this recording was obtained through entrapment. Overruled. The judge replied with the sort of dry satisfaction that suggested she'd been looking forward to this moment. The defendant volunteered this information without coercion. The recording stands. There's something deeply satisfying about watching corrupt people discover that their corruption has consequences. It doesn't happen often enough, but when it does, it's magnificent. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Divorce granted to Chloe, no asset division to Eric, all court costs to be paid by the defendants, and Here's where it got really good: criminal charges to be filed against Eric, Caitlin, and Klein for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Justice isn't just blind, apparently. Sometimes she's also got quite a good sense of humor. Walking down the courthouse steps into the late spring sunshine of Sioux City, I felt like we were emerging from some sort of legal dungeon into actual daylight. Chloe paused at the bottom, turning to me with the sort of expression that suggested she was processing several months' worth of emotional whiplash. Dad, I still don't understand how we afforded Elena and that investigative team. You must have spent every penny you had. Let me find a way to pay you back, right? Time for the conversation I'd been avoiding for the better part of a year. We drove home in companionable silence, the sort that comes after surviving something genuinely awful together. Back in our living room, which suddenly felt like a sanctuary after months of legal warfare, I finally retrieved that lockbox from my study. Chloe, sit down. There's something I need to tell you. She perched on the edge of the sofa with the sort of alertness that suggested she was bracing for more bad news. What now? Haven't we been through enough drama for one lifetime? I opened the box and pulled out the envelope marked Estate of Harold Sanders. Watching her eyes widen as the numbers became clear. Granddad left us £9 million, I said, spreading the documentation across our coffee table like evidence of our own good fortune. He died late last year, remember? I've been hiding it since the will reading. £9 million. The sort of money that transforms ordinary problems into manageable inconveniences and turns predators like Eric into the pathetic bottom feeders they actually are. 9 million. Chloe's voice went up several octaves, hands flying to her mouth in that universal gesture of holy shit. My life just changed completely. Dad, why keep it secret? We've been struggling with bills, the house repairs, everything. Because, my dear, naive daughter, money changes people. And I needed to know who you were marrying before I told you we were suddenly wealthy enough to attract every gold digger within a 50-mile radius. For protection, I said, settling beside her and pulling her into a hug that felt like the first honest embrace we'd shared in months. Granddad warned me about users and predators. When Eric started probing about our finances, making those snide comments about our modest lifestyle, I knew hiding it had been the right choice. She traced the figures with trembling fingers, tears starting to well up. All this time, you let them think we were poor, endured their condescension, their barely disguised contempt. For me, for you, always for you, because that's what parents do. We absorb the world's cruelty so our children don't have to. He built this fortune quietly, I continued, thinking about Granddad's fishing trips and chess lessons. All those conversations about spotting manipulation and protecting what matters. Local property investments, careful planning, decades of patience. And he left it to us with one instruction: use it wisely. The really beautiful part was finding Granddad's handwritten note tucked into the legal documents. Philip, tell Chloe when it's safe. This legacy is about strength and security, not just money. She'll understand when she's ready. He'd known. Somehow, the crafty old bastard had known exactly what we'd be facing. Chloe laughed through her tears. That particular sound that comes from relief mixed with exhaustion and a healthy dose of, what the actual hell has my life become? Those stories he used to tell me about spotting fake people and protecting family. It all makes sense now. We spent the evening going through photo albums, sharing memories of Granddad over cups of tea that actually tasted good for once. Plans began forming. Travel to those places he'd always talked about, maybe a proper holiday somewhere warm, definitely getting the central heating fixed. But mostly we talked about the future, about building something stable and secure, about making choices based on what we wanted rather than what we could afford. What now? She asked as we closed the albums and prepared for what felt like the first normal bedtime we'd had in months. Now we live, I said, thinking about Granddad's final piece of advice. We use this gift to build something good, and we never, ever let arseholes like Eric think they can manipulate us for money. Because that's the thing about having fuck you money, it gives you the freedom to actually say fuck you when people deserve it. 6 months later, we received word that Eric had been sentenced to 18 months for fraud, whilst Caitlin got 2 years for conspiracy and racketeering. Klein, the notary, received community service, and a lifetime ban from anything involving legal documents. Justice, it turns out, is occasionally quite satisfying when you can afford the sort of lawyers who actually know what they're doing. Chloe moved into a lovely flat near the river. Nothing ostentatious, just comfortable and entirely hers. She started a small business doing graphic design work, funded by a modest investment from our newfound family fortune. No pressure, no desperation, just the freedom to build something she actually cared about. I kept the house but had it properly renovated, central heating that works, windows that don't let in Arctic drafts, a kitchen where you don't have to perform minor miracles to make a decent cup of tea. Small luxuries that feel enormous when you've been doing without them. We learned something important through all this. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy options. And options are the difference between being trapped and being free. The real satisfaction, though, came from watching Chloe rebuild her confidence. She'd learned to spot manipulators at 50 paces, developed a healthy skepticism about people who were too charming too quickly, and generally acquired the sort of emotional armor that comes from surviving someone else's attempt to destroy your life. Plus, she had a spectacular story to tell at dinner parties. Nothing quite like my ex-husband tried to defraud my family and ended up in prison for shutting down boring small talk. As for me, I'd learned that sometimes the best way to protect someone is to let them think they're facing the world alone while secretly ensuring they have every advantage. Not the most honest approach, perhaps, but definitely effective. Granddad's final lesson. The best inheritance isn't money. It's the wisdom to know when to reveal it. We visit his grave regularly now, usually with stories about how his money helped us defeat the latest crop of arseholes trying to exploit our family. I like to think he'd be proud of how we handled the whole bloody mess. After all, we protected our own, outsmarted the predators, and came out stronger. What more could a cantankerous old investor ask for? The inheritance sits mostly untouched, growing steadily in carefully managed accounts. We take what we need, donate to causes that matter, and keep the rest as insurance against whatever the world throws at us next. Because there will be a next time. There always is. But now we're ready for it. And if you've enjoyed this particular tale of family loyalty, strategic deception, and the deeply satisfying downfall of matrimonial predators, well, that's what the subscribe button is for, isn't it? After all, we've got plenty more stories where this came from. Turns out having money doesn't solve all your problems. It just gives you better quality problems to solve. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've just witnessed a masterclass in why keeping family secrets can occasionally be the most loving thing you can do. Also why prenups exist, why private investigators earn their fees, and why some people really do deserve everything horrible that happens to them. Like and subscribe if you believe in justice, family loyalty, and the occasional tactical use of hidden assets for defensive purposes. Comment below if you've ever had to deal with gold diggers, fraudulent in-laws, or anyone who's ever called your life choices quaint. Until next time, remember, the best revenge isn't living well. It's living well with enough money to make your enemies' lives significantly more complicated.